Good morning, everyone. Say, if you would start to find your seats, get your coffee, and we're going to get started here in just a minute. Well, everybody got quiet, so it must be time to start. Well, listen, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Really pleasure to have everyone here this morning. You know, I was thinking, looking at the first slide, the flowers coming up, outside the sunshine coming up, hopefully temperatures are warming. It is spring, and a lot of things are beginning to grow. And, you know, as I think about our agenda today, we are talking about really a lot of the things we've planted, if you will, over the years as a group. Have really taken off, and we're going to get a lot of good updates on a lot of these initiatives and the progress that we're making. We've got a couple special guests today. We're going to get a great report on the trails in general and some detailed announcements. We've got what I think will be a terrific panel discussion on our housing update. And then we're going to talk about what's going on in the new, what we're calling Waterfront Plaza Shipping Channel Park. And then moving right into harbor redevelopment. We're going to get an update then from Rob on the work with Cornerstone Alliance and the development, the activities they've been in. And then we've got a number of topics on talent, because you can't do this without people. You can't do this without the right talent and retaining and training and developing. And there's a lot of, collectively, we have a lot of initiatives going on in that area. So with that, you know, again, back to spring, back to things growing and expanding. I kind of feel that way about the agenda, and we're going to turn over to some folks who will give us updates on all this. But let me start then and ask John to come up here and kind of kick us off. John?
Good morning, everybody. It is great to be here again. The Spring Summit, one of the things that I think is most exciting about today was the first 15 minutes here today. The energy in the room, if you didn't get the sense, I think we have officially and finally and can put that final nail in the coffin and say that our COVID experience is past us and our future is bright. We've got really good things happening right now, and the number of organizations represented in this room is a record this year then also. So from my board members' perspective, SLC board members, if you could raise your hand, please, just so that we can say thank you to you. A big hand for our board members. Thank you. What's clear is that the board members themselves, SLC is just one component of many, many components of our community where folks are working cooperatively together. Many of you also then serve, that are not on an SLC board, are on many other organizational structures and boards too, that are a part of today's goals and objectives. A part of the way that we can try to work cooperatively together to see some of the needle move in the right direction for Southwest Michigan as a whole. Berrien County, of course, is the general focus of where we're looking right now, but we know that we're interdependent amongst all of our communities in all of Southwest Michigan. And some of our organizations in the room work in all three. Some of our organizations work only in Berrien. Others work statewide. We together have an amazing amount of resources in this room as a whole and outside of this room that have not yet found their way to the table that's empty in the corner over here. So I would ask you to think about who's missing today and who needs to be a part of these cooperative organizational structures to help to make a difference. In a county of 150,000 people, we cannot allow ourselves to individually try to solve every problem. We all have very specific roles and responsibilities. There is no doubt about that. Our boards require us to do that too, right? And you as board members may be requiring some of those organizations that you work with to have very specific goals and objectives. But those goals and objectives are all aiming towards the same goal that we have in Berrien County, which is what we said we believe ourselves to be, which is in Michigan's great Southwest, it is a vibrant and prosperous region to live, learn, work, invest, grow, play, and retire for everyone. That being the mantra that we all have to continue to aspire towards. In my mind, aspiration is what we need to keep our focus on as we move forward. One of the ways that we do that, obviously, Strategic Leadership Council is as follows. You've seen this slide. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but as a reminder, we all want to look at those metrics that are pushing us in the right direction. Those are metrics that cross every organization in Berrien County. Every nonprofit, every NGO, every government organization, we're looking for those same goals and objectives to be achieved. Together, collectively, that's the goal of SLC, is to bring these threads together and to pull those threads tight enough to make a coherent fabric, a coherent piece of fabric that actually is trying to make a difference in our community. Community-driven, leader-led, organizationally supported. That's where you all come in. We know that this is what it looks like today, but as I said, we are missing folks at that table. That we now have somebody at the table. Check it out. We've actually got folks at the table. Thank you very much. We're going to grow the communities and the organizations. We're going to talk about trails in just a moment, but I think the whole concept of the way that you build trails in Berrien County is exactly what this SLC goal and objective is you can't possibly make a linear trail connect to each other unless you can communicate across community lines. You can't possibly make those trails cohesive, move from one community to the next if you haven't figured out how to be friends with your neighbors across the way. Now, are there places where we're going to have friction and challenges? Of course there are. There always are. It's also called human nature. That's okay. In that competitive spirit, though, can also bring new opportunities for growth and development. So as we look to what SLC's structure is, we of course start to look at exactly what some of those metrics are. I won't read these slides to you, but you all pay attention to these metrics. They're metrics we of course watch very carefully too. And wouldn't we all like to see these metrics become better for everybody? There are a few that are not on here. Educational attainment is not on here right now for our educators in the room. But isn't that important to our entire county? Of course it is. Health outcomes and health disparities. Are we identifying that on this slide? We're not. But that is absolutely critical too. If we have an unhealthy community, we know that we have a community that cannot continue to grow in the areas that we want it to, including educational attainment, etc. So there are so many places that we can continue to try to focus and work towards. These metrics are inconsistent on occasion. So let's continue to pay attention to them so that we can figure out how to work cooperatively to solve some of those problems. This is the list of investors. Many of you in this room, thank you all again for continuing to see that we can be of value together in trying to pull those threads that I was referring to. And Susan, thank you again for all of your work. If we can give Susan a hand, please, thank you. I had the opportunity to talk with former Representative Pasholka and former Representative Andrea LaFontaine, who you'll hear from in just a moment. And we both noted that we really can't do anything after being in the legislature unless you've got great staff with you. But you all know that too, right? If you don't have great staff in your communities, in your local governments, in your organizational structures, it makes it really difficult. And Susan is doing a great job for all of us at Strategic Leadership Council. So with that, I have the opportunity today, as we aspire towards the really great things that are happening in the community, to talk about Andrea LaFontaine, who will be joining us in just a moment. She's here today. Andrea is the Executive Director for the Michigan Trails and Greenways Alliance, responsible for the overall strategic and operational organizations and staff programs and the execution of the Michigan of the Trails and Greenways Alliance. In that, of course, it is helping people to build, connect, and promote trails for a healthier, I found that interesting, right? Very directly healthier, and a more prosperous Michigan. She was recently named the Griffin Endowed Chair in American Government at Central Michigan University, so she's a professor also. As chair, she teaches 2 university courses and hosts community forums on topics related to Michigan's government and Michigan's government policies and practices. I don't think that's a part of today's discussion. That could be an entire SLC Summit, is just government and how we operate, or don't operate, depending upon your perspective. Before coming to the Michigan Greenways Alliance, Andrea spent 2 years as the executive director for the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, acting as the Southeast Michigan Policy Advisor and assisting the Belle Isle Trail team. That is a fascinating discussion. I don't know if that's a part of it, but the Belle Isle Trail team has done amazing work and really is aspirational for all of us. Prior to that, she served 6 years in the Michigan House of Representatives in District 32, covering northern Macomb and portions of St. Clair County. During her tenure in the legislature, she served on multiple policy committees and was appointed chairwoman of the Natural Resources Committee for 4 years in the House of Representatives. A Bachelor of Science and a Master's in Public Administration from Central Michigan University. Please help me welcome former Representative and Executive Director of the Michigan Trails and Greenways Alliance, Andrea LaFontaine.
Just lower this a little bit. All right, good morning. Thank you, John, for that introduction. I told him to only read like the first or second sentence, so you did not need to read the rest of that, but thank you. I'm excited to be here in Southwest Michigan. I come from Southeast, so always look forward to coming over to this side. Your beaches are beautiful. I did make sure to drive out there, put my feet in the sand. It was great. So I'm even more excited to be here talking about trails. So with my job, we go where the trail development is on the cusp of really exploding and transforming communities. So that's why I'm excited to be here today. In my presentation, we're going to talk about the power of trails relative to economic impact, how they foster healthy, connected communities. We're going to highlight some of the local and regional achievements that you have already in motion, and then we're going to set our sights on an ambitious future. I'd also like to note that I do have a board member of my own in the room. So Gary Wood is here. Gary, will you raise your hand, please? Gary is my boss, so I'm going to try and not be nervous up here presenting in front of him. Okay, so trails, a path to a thriving Michigan. We've been really working to change the paradigm in how we talk about trails, right? They are more than recreation. They're seen as transportation, they have health outcomes, all these other components that we're working on integrating into the message about trails. We'll talk about the value of a trail, right? So public sector consultants, they're based out of Lansing. They did a specific economic impact study in Southeast Michigan, talking about the location of the trail. How long should a trail be in order to have these benefits? Including the connectivity to community assets, business districts, amenities, and all of that. I skipped, let me see. Yes, so the other thing that I want to mention that we often don't think about with trails, and how many of you, raise your hand if you are a trail user? All right, majority of you in the room, right? Which is clearly representative of our non-motorized trail users. People use trails walking with their family, they use them hiking, they use them biking, mountain biking. We have water trails, which I know you're familiar with here in Southwest Michigan, where you can paddle. So it really is quite a dynamic user group, and it is everybody. We recently had a conversation with the director of DNR talking about the sustainable funding model for amenities such as trails. And the concept of users pay came up, and my question to him was, who are our users? How are you defining them? Because a lot of our trail users are neighbors of trails, right? It's not the person going and buying the backpack and the hiking shoes. It's everybody. It's everybody in our communities are the ones that are using trails. And I think we need to be mindful of that. I feel like I skipped. Maybe not. I did have a MICA slide, so we'll go. It's not in here. That's okay. So MICA, my organization, I'm going to briefly tell you about them and why we're qualified to talk on this topic. Michigan Trails and Greenways Alliance, we've been around since the 80s. We started as the Rails to Trails chapter of Michigan. Rails to Trails then decided to regionalize, went to this neighboring state called Ohio, and we were like, well, that doesn't work for us. We're going to do our own trail thing here in Michigan. So we started the Michigan Trails and Greenways Alliance. Our goal is to work with communities and trail users through the entire life cycle of a trail, whether it be planning, whether it's a group of people in a coffee shop who are like, we think we should have a trail from here to here. How do we help them with that, right? Because you can't just draw a line on a map. There's a lot of real estate nuances behind it, and that's where our organization comes in and offers that technical assistance. Learning from leaders. So throughout the state, because we are a statewide organization, we do have some pretty strong nonprofit partners, and we like to really look at what they're doing and why success really happens relative to trails there. What is that relationship between the nonprofit, the local unit of government, and the community? And a few that I'm going to call to your attention are Traverse Area Regional Transportation Trails. So TART, any of you frequent Northwest Michigan, hop on the Traverse Trails? They're pretty great. Julie Clark does a great job up there. And then we have Huron-Waterloo Pathways Initiative, which is in Washtenaw County, and their focus is the border-to-border trail. So they're working on a trail that goes around the entire border of their county. People love loop trails, by the way. It's really interesting when you look at user data. We're always trying to build more and more miles of trail, but when someone builds a continuous loop, it's amazing how people flock to the loop. There's something about going in a circle that people enjoy. So the loop trail that was just completed, the Boardman Lake Loop, is the one in the top corner up there. And the leaders at TART had to work with more than 10 municipalities to pull this off. There's a brownfield zone. They had to work with the state. It was, it was pretty messy, but they got it done, and it looks fantastic. So if you're up there, I highly recommend checking it out. The key to getting this done is not just patience and perseverance, because sometimes it takes 20 plus years to actually get these things from start to finish, but it's working with your municipal leaders, which we know cycle in and out, and often change their priorities and whether or not they want to continue working on trails. So we hope that all understand the value of trails and what they bring to the community and continuing this vision for making them possible. Public-private funding models are another thing that I want to point out. Government and communities can't do this type of development on their own. It takes a combination of public-private funding to make it successful, and we often find that sometimes that last chunk funding is really what makes the biggest difference, right? So we'll have these trails that have been planned at the regional and local level, and they're good to go, and they just need those final dollars to get them over the finish line. So our organization last year was trying to work. We put just a rough list together of 34 trails throughout the entire state, which a lot of these trails we were advocating for were in Southwest Michigan. Trying to get an appropriation, our ask was for $150 million, which seems extreme, I know, but when you separate that through the 34 trails, it's quite a lot. But all of these trails were regional in significance and had private dollars already leveraged. We weren't successful, but we're gonna keep trying. So, okay, a green gateway to growth, the Marquette Greenway, which when we share news about the Marquette Greenway on our communication platforms, people get really excited about this idea of connecting Chicago all the way up to Michigan. Because then once you get into Michigan and go north, right, the possibilities are endless. You could go straight up the coast, you could go east to west. There is a trail, the Calhaven Trail. Actually, you could take that 275 miles east and wind up at Lake Huron in Port Huron. So, a few partners I want to highlight here. The Marquette Greenway's expansion into this county is cause for celebration, right? Trail success typically happens when bookends start putting pressure. When the development is coming from the sides, right, they start pushing this pressure to foster the connection in between. And Friends of Berrien County Trails in their master plan is a roadmap to this success. When you look at this county and the work that they did, putting that plan out there and showing how these communities can be connected as a county as a whole is really, really meaningful, right? And also when you're talking to people that want to invest in trails, they want to know that you have a plan. They don't want you just to be like, yeah, we think we should go from here to here. They want to know that it's planned somewhere. So this expansion with the Marquette Greenway is going to connect communities, enhance the natural beauty of the region, and we found that trails also spark talent, attraction, and retention, right? When people are looking at communities, we know post-COVID, COVID kind of changed the way we work. It's allowed a lot of flexibility in people deciding where they want to live because a lot of jobs offer now remote positions. So when you're considering where you want to be, people are looking at these assets in these communities and deciding Well, this would be great for my family, right? Parks, trails, all of that add to the quality of life in an area. So a trailblazing vision, we do want to highlight Whirlpool as a catalyst. We love to see instances where private industry is investing in something in their campus, in their community, and in their employees. It really speaks to the fabric of an organization. And we're excited to hear about this. The Trails magazine, I don't know if you've seen, there might be a couple copies floating around on here, but the Trails magazine is like our trail Bible, if you will. We send it out a new edition every single year to our members, and it has all of the trails throughout the state of Michigan, and the Whirlpool Trail is in there this year. So the producer of the magazine was very, very excited to go out there, ride the trails, and GIS map it. But they are leading by example, and they have over, I believe Marcy gave me the data of over 200 visitors a day, a week. That's a lot. So speaking of plans, I do want to talk to you a little bit about, MICA is launching this initiative called Michigan Trails 2050. We're noticing a trend in people putting these metrics to things of 2050, looking out into the future. And previously, our organization did have a plan that aimed to connect Michigan, but we're in a new state now, right? We're looking at how trails impact health, communities, economic development, and how people are engaging with that. So our goal with this plan, which we're launching this year, is to really decide what do we want trails in Michigan to look like in 2050. So the plan's going to focus on increasing trail connectivity, improving accessibility. Accessibility is key. When people go to a trail, they want to know that they have a safe place to park, that they can access it easily, and that there's usually good wayfinding. I've also noticed in my job that I've become a wayfinding critic in airports and on college campuses such as this, and I'm like, wow, we could up this a little bit. So enhancing public engagement with trails. I had to throw that at Al. So the ultimate goal is to create, promote, and sustain the network of trails and the benefits to Michiganders, accelerating health and community connections and economic development. So the biggest takeaway from this, if you remember anything, it's that trails are more than recreation, right? They're transportation, they're quality of life, they're investments in our communities. When we talk about building this thriving tomorrow, I pulled this executive summary right out of the master plan for Berrien County. So, Gary, that's a nod to you. We look at the talent, attraction, and retention, healthier workforce, healthier economy, environmental stewardship, right? Because there are people that go out there just to be with nature, right? The stress relief that you feel from just being outside and being with nature is something else. Connected communities and stronger bonds. So, with all of that, I put this up here because in my mind, I had a hard time visualizing. I was visualizing the benefits of trails in buckets, and I didn't realize that they're all interconnected and it's quite cyclical. So we talk about this quality of life. We talk about the physical and mental health, the access to the nature and outdoors, right? And then economic development. Tourism, that's kind of the low-hanging fruit. We know people are gonna come, especially when we're building significant, continuous, connected trail. Walkable, bikeable communities really add value to communities. We talk about the environment, the gateway to the outdoors. The barrier to entry to trails is really one of the most accessible outdoor recreation amenities that we have. You really only have to have a pair of shoes. And depending on who you are, if you're like my children, who are feral most of the time, they don't even have their shoes, but they love the trails. So we think about that as well. Stewards of the environment, carbon reduction, climate conscious. And then we think of who we are, right? The fabric of our being as Michiganders. We're outdoor people. We're the Great Lakes state, right? We talked last night at dinner about the Rust Belt. We are the Rust Belt, but we're also surrounded by the Great Lakes. So we have this kind of like intrinsic part of our being where, you know what, like we are outdoor people. We need to embrace this, we need to showcase this, and we need to invite others to come to Michigan and want to experience this, and come to Southwest Michigan. So, that's all I have for you. Do you want me? Yeah.
If you're willing, a couple of minutes for questions. We have the
Sure.
opportunity with the executive director here to be able to ask questions. Any questions that pop right out? I'm shocked. It's Peter Kolovis, folks, from the great state of Hager.
Thank you. Peter Clovis, great state of Hager, trustee. In Hager, we drink the Kool-Aid. So we want to thank you. We want to thank Gary. We want to thank Mike and the entire Berrien Trails group for all their good hard work. Recently, we've had the pleasure of submitting an application in Hager for a DNR Trust Fund grant for a connective water trail with a wilderness trail. Through that process, we realized very simply that there's less priority in rural areas based on the scoring that they gave us for our application. It was a very strong application. That said, we know that the urban centers are much more inclined to score higher. How do we get this changed?
It's a really great question, and I will actually let you know that the DNR is beginning the conversations about changing their scoring criteria. We're starting to hear more about emphasis, right? It's kind of like it's a shift. Right now they're evaluating where their previous scoring criteria, what has that impacted relative to the funds that they're putting out there. So they're evaluating that to see if they moved any metrics that they set out when they adopted that scoring criteria. Their new director of grants, Clay Summers, I don't know if you've met him yet, he came from MParks, and he is really interested in wrapping his head around changing scoring criteria. So you and I can talk about suggestions, because I have a direct line to Clay, and I have my list of suggestions to make these grants more even or fair throughout the state. And thanks for putting one in, by the way. The trust fund is a great source for these things. So,
Real quick, are you just advocacy or lobbying?
depends on who you ask. So we advocate. We did have a hired lobbyist for about a year. But yes, relative to this, you and I can chat, and I can put all your comments together, and we will take them directly to the source and make sure they are delivered. So we'll call that advocating in the 501c3 space.
Excellent advocacy. Questions?
No questions.
All right, very good. How about a hand for Andrea,
All
please?
right,
Thank you
thank
very
you.
much. And with that, help me welcome former mayor of the city of St. Joseph, Mike Gary, for a special announcement. Mike, please come forward. Y'all can clap for Mike. He's number 2 when it comes to the trails.
Goodness gracious. I have a little frog in my throat, so I'll have water up here. Where do I point? Oh, there I am. All right, well, good morning all, and thank you so much. Andrew, I didn't know you were a Central Michigan graduate. I also graduated from Central Michigan, back with stone tablets and chisels, but it was a few years ago. So, let's get our portion. Oop, wrong way. I'm always going the wrong way. All right, I just want to kick this off a little bit about our trail system and what you've heard about in Berrien County and how we're growing, and about the announcement today about a new 2.5-mile trail. But as you heard from Andrea, there are many components to trails and what they bring to a community. And I look at this well, when I read this from Rob Cleveland, it was a great article he put together a few weeks ago. And it's very thorough, but it presents an honest, transparent view of what our headwinds are throughout our community. And as all of you with SLC, you're movers and shakers, but you want our community to improve. That's why you're here. There are folks who rent in a community and folks who are invest in a community. This group are investors in our community and our future. And Rob's point was that we have headwinds, but we have tremendous opportunities to put the wind at our backs. And that's why I really appreciate about Rob's comments and his vision and what Cornerstone really wants to put together in the future. And you're going to hear more comments later today about how we can start getting the wind behind us. So, to that point, getting it down, you saw from Andrew, the state level. You've heard about this level. I want to acknowledge Gary Wood. And of course, we also have Bob Clark, our treasurer from Friends of Berrien County Trails. This is the big idea, the 100 miles. where it's a triangle from New Buffalo to Niles, Niles to the St. Joe, Ben Harbor area. That's the big vision. But let's bring it down a little bit closer to what's going on right now along the shoreline. You heard about the Marquette Greenway. If you've been down to Union Pier or to Timothy's, just south of Wanganum's neighborhood in Bridgman, you'll see what's going on along Red Arrow Highway in the Linear Park. It's a beautiful development, more construction's going on. So that's bringing it down closer. But let's bring it down to our area right here. The Lakeshore Trail. This is what we're kicking off. This is our soft opening today for the Lakeshore Trail. As you saw earlier, and you're aware of the mountain bike trail on Whirlpool's campus, that's called the Lakeview Trail. We're calling this the Lakeshore Trail because it does connect communities, and it's a Lakeshore Trail because it goes all the way from New Buffalo, from State Line. It's going to go up through the Twin City area, up to South Haven, and again, as Andrea said, it'll connect to a Cal Haven Trail. But the energy around trails in the state, it's like a tipping point. Folks in Covert, Van Buren, they're applying for trails. You have folks in Saugatuck, they're looking at bringing trails south to South Haven. That's why we want to name this the Lakeshore Trail. Phase 1 is Hickman Park Road to Monty Road Trailhead, 2.5 miles. You can see that, you can see on the map where it's going. And you can see the funding sources, the engineering review by MDOT this year, right-of-way, local match, getting that secured, bid project, fall of 2024, turning dirt early 2025. The total project cost is $3.15 million. Through all the sources and partners, we have $2.4 million secured. We have a goal we need to raise to do this is $750,000. So, honest question, why would you give money to 2.5 miles of a trail? Why would you do that? What's the return? How does it benefit the community? Well, for our community to maximize its potential, this is a main piece of that. This 2.5 mile stretch is equal distance from New Buffalo to South Haven. This is the connecting point. With this 2.5 mile section, how does it help our community, the Twin City area? With this, you'll be connecting communities in the Enterprise area, Hickman Park, Ridgeway, Harbor Shores, Edgewater. All these neighbors will now be able to enjoy a safe means of transportation, a safe trail to walk, to ride with families. A family up in Edgewater with this trail will safely be able to walk or bike down toward the Harbor Shore area, connect over to Rocky Gap, connect over to Jean Clark Beach, connect over to Tiscornia, connect over into the Ben Harbor area, connect over to downtown Ben Harbor, connect over to downtown St. Joe. And future connections, I know there's representatives here from Ben Harbor. Ben Harbor is doing a fabulous focus on Hull Park and Knox Creek. So this 2.5 miles, we're successful with this. We can leverage this 2.5 miles to greater projects in our area. So this is really more of a tipping point for our whole community on how we can bring a trail system which will provide a healthy environment and also help drive an economic engine for our area. Because as Andrea mentioned, it is for retainage of employees and for attraction of employees. Many people now can work remotely, so they want to enjoy the outdoors. They want to enjoy a positive lifestyle. So we are here to kick off our fundraising As Monsignor Sears at St. Joe Catholic would say, there's not a mass unless you pass the plate. So all the folks here that raised your hand, Bob Clark, raise your hand. He's our treasurer. You got coins, dollars, checks, just go see Bob. So we have an ambitious goal, a doable goal, raise this amount of money. We have a team put together for the fundraising. We'll be having 2 really fun fundraising events to get people engaged with this process. And you'll be able to look at the Friends of Berrien County website for donations. But really think about this. Think about all the years SLC, the work from with Dr. Hamill, Jeff Fettig put this together. Things are really starting to come together. Things are blooming just like you saw with the flowers. It's springtime. But this 2.5 miles is a game changer for the community. It really, really is. So with that, I'll take any questions, cash, donations, credit cards, debit cards. If you want to sell a child, whatever it takes. Any questions on the Lake Shore Trail, how we're connecting communities? All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Andrea. While the conversation was about this connector point from the Twin Cities, the work that has been done in the south part of the county, in particular with the Marquette Greenway up into Harbor Country, of which we have several Harbor Country folks here with us, so thank you very much, both John and Michelle and others. That really is, as Andrea had talked about, the bookends that are starting to come together to be able to make the connectivity work, right? The kind of pressure that is occurring because of the good work and investment that's been made from Chicago through the Marquette Greenway up into the New Buffalo and Harbor Country area leaves us with the responsibility of connecting north from there. This happens to be the one catalyst that's actualized for the Van Buren County down through into the Twin Cities. So the ask is recognizing that trails are simply requiring communities and local municipalities to be able to cooperate together to make these things happen. So that's the next phase in this. And as Mike Gary said last night, he said, look, we can't make trails work if we can't make them connect to all over Berrien County with the master plan leading the charge. But when you have a bird in hand, you have to take advantage of that through Hager Township and Monty Road, essentially. And you know what's just north of there? Connection to what was referred to as an east-west thoroughfare throughout the entire state of Michigan, which is the Calhaven Trail. Well, we have to be able to get to that by virtue of bringing people along that connection. So great things are happening in the trail space. We really appreciate all of the folks in this room who are helping to make that happen and to continue to put pressure on how we make this community connection come together. So as we shift gears now, I want to give us an opportunity to talk a little bit about, I did not do that. I swear to you, I didn't do that. We're not doing Chris and we're not doing fellowship. No, hold on. Yep, this is the one we're going to do. This is very much by design. The 4 people that you see on the right are appointed officials from portions of our county. These appointed officials are not elected officials. I'll point that out because I think it's a unique opportunity for us to have a conversation about how we prepare for the future of housing in particular. One of the things that we all at Strategic Leadership Council have done is to work from a fact set, that set of data that we can all agree is truth. If we agree that that's truth based upon data, then we can begin to ask questions about how we move the needle in areas that are of importance to all of us. The SLC Housing Diagnostic Tool with our partners at Southwest Michigan Planning have helped to build that conversation around, are we prepared for solutions to this housing crisis? We all know that it's there. We've been talking about it for an awful long time. We know that there's been opportunities for us to solve this if we're prepared as local communities. So this is an excellent opportunity for a dialogue, a conversation from these appointed officials managers and so forth who will give you some good insight as to what it takes in a municipality. And let me put it this way. If at the end of this you find a way that you can help to influence some of the elected officials to be prepared, it gives everybody the opportunity to see a better path towards solving this housing crisis. And, by the way, if we want to grow as a community, if we do not have housing, how can we attract new people? That's just an easy 1 + 1 = 2. Can we get there? Sure we can, if we set the stage for that. So please help me welcome our moderator to the panel, John Eaglehoff, and then our folks from our local municipalities, Darwin Watson, Emily Hackworth. We also have Rick Huff from the City of Niles, Emily, City of St. Joseph, and Juan from the City of Bridgman. Please welcome them all forward.
Have at it. The trail stuff makes me remember early on in the life of the SLC, at the very beginning, a careful look at master plans across all the communities involved. It was trails that was the common link. I think it was something like close to 90% of those communities all had mentioned that trails and recreation planning was top of mind for them. So here we are, many years later, and seeing the fruition of, the SLC among a lot of organizations, but particularly SLC recognizing this is where we need to focus. One of those really important, prominent areas we need to focus. Okay, so folks, I'm really appreciative of the people that are sitting in front of you. But I want to make sure that we're all clear on why we're here. So based on research that the folks at SLC and the SWMPC, my organization, did, we know that there's a significant gap between supply and demand in Berrien County and the housing marketplace. We're here today because there are people in the audience who care a lot about this issue, and because each of you has seen some recent success, each of these folks, in addressing that issue. So let's hear from folks who are seeing some movement. My purpose is to explore what's been done in the jurisdictions that these folks represent to move the needle back in the direction that we're all hoping it moves. So thank you all for doing this, and let's proceed on to some questions here and we'll get some insight. So let's begin with what you consider a solution, a success with housing in the place you're from. I'm not asking you to explain how it was made possible, only the end result. So we're going to keep it brief, and we only have so much time here, so I want to be as succinct as we can be on this first question. But just tell us the end result of that success, and later we'll get into the levers that had to be pulled in order to make it happen. So the successes you've seen so far.
Good. This is on. Hi. First, thank you so much for having this panel and for inviting me to be part of it. I'm going to lead off with a controversial answer, especially with New Buffalo in the room, and say that we've had a success recently with short-term rentals, adding them to our downtown district. I know this is supposed to be a short answer, but it's an opportunity for us to activate some spaces above our retail storefronts that are currently unused, which will be fantastic for bringing more people into our downtown. We did a lot of homework on this. One of the things that we learned was that a lot of spaces that are prepared for short-term rentals after some time become just rentals, which would be great for our downtown. And most importantly, in my mind, having short-term rentals in our downtown might help us to get some of our bigger developments off the ground. We've had some challenges in the past in making a development pencil, as I'm learning, they say. And so adding short-term rentals to the mix, we think, could be a factor that could help us get some bigger developments off the ground.
Bridgman has had two exciting successes in the last 4 or 5 months. One, significant project, 68-unit housing development called Bridgman Trails, this plan unit development that was just recently approved by our city council. And then another more small-scale project, it's a partnership with Harbor Habitat for Humanity for 6 units on property that was formerly city-owned and then transferred over to Habitat. So we expect both of those to take shape later this year.
In Niles, the municipality is mostly completely built out to our city limits. So most of what we have to do is either redevelopment of brownfield type facilities or better use the properties that are there in some other fashion. We have added about 170 units in the last couple of years of multifamily housing in the community. We have a 48 unit under construction right now. And city just entered into an agreement with a developer for 36 city-owned vacant lots for infill housing, single-family housing to be built on it. So I think we're making some headway, but there's plenty of room for growth.
In the city of New Buffalo, quite like Niles, we are built out for the majority. What we've looked at is looking at ways to do, as Emily alluded to, by changing our zoning and how we do things more retail, residential, and use. And then also, we're working or collaboratively beginning to work with New Buffalo Township and finding a way to get workforce housing in the community, because we have to look at it more at a macro level than we do a micro individual community.
Great. Were the answers you gave, the particular successes you mentioned, examples of the marketplace organically addressing a part of your housing issues, or were those projects, in some cases multiple projects, the result of pressure imposed on the market to make it do something that it wouldn't otherwise have done? And the example might be public funding, for instance, where you infusing public funding in to make that last kind of critical inflection. Or is it the result of a change in regulation or policy that made something possible that wasn't before? And this would be obviously things like zoning or permitting changes. I just came back from a conference where they were talking about Minneapolis's extremely important zoning changes that has made Minneapolis a real epicenter for housing success. So one of those two, or something else that maybe fits not comfortably in either of those categories? Darwin?
I'll say it's a little bit of both. A lot of things we had to look at revolve around not being an insane community and continuing to do what we have always done. You have to change your methodology in order to attract what you want. And, younger, more transient people look for places that they can do things that they don't have to necessarily own a home. So we had to find a way to make it so those are attractive for them. So thus, when we say zoning, it's something that changed it. And then the other part of it is the market there's just a need there. Like I said, a lot of people don't want to own homes. And we have a lot of people who come that are just looking to get something that they can live in and then, not have the responsibility of maintenance and upkeep of it.
So, and this was, our research also showed this, that we are not just talking about single-family home purchases here. This is need across the spectrum of rental and ownership. So, good point. Rick, are you?
Sure. For me, it's a combination of a lot of things. We used to have this pretty visionary planner that worked for the city of Niles that really kind of set the stage, more than 15 or almost 20 years ago, to where we're still headed today with zoning. It's funny, we're just finishing up this redevelopment ready community certification, hopefully just on the cusp of getting that done. And they have all these best practices, right? How do you best interact with developers, and how are you prepared for that development to occur in your town? I'm like, one did this 20 years ago. we don't even really have to invent the wheel, because we were we had those efficiencies in place. The problem is we didn't have someone to take advantage of those efficiencies. So then, the market sometimes drives it. Sometimes there's just this need, and the need is so great that the developers see the opportunity there. Sometimes it is an incentive through the state of Michigan usually for some type of housing incentive, which we all know that's a high priority right now, that pushes a developer just over the edge and gets them moving. And more recently, it's really just been personal connections. Maybe a local businessman knows someone, has a conversation, and talks about the opportunities that are in your community, and it just kind of organically grows from there.
So I hear you talking sort of broadly and generally, and you're reaching way back into, prehistory when things were very different. But how about those specific projects you were talking about? Tell me what things in those projects that happened that sort of jiggered the marketplace in some way that worked for you.
Yeah. Almost all of them had something different that pushed them. Some of the more housing that was more geared towards senior type housing was really driven through incentives that the state has for developers, and those developers recognizing the need for that type of housing in our community. And then the most recent developments really were word of mouth conversations with other just individuals in the community, or mostly business people in the community who had personal connections and made those connections for us so that we could talk directly with the developers. They would have been individuals I would have never known or had a method of ever meeting, probably on my own, without those connections.
Interesting. And when state funding becomes a possibility, who knows about that and starts to pull that lever? Is that you? Is that somebody? How does that information get to people that are involved in the transaction?
Well, that's a pretty interesting conversation. So, like I mentioned, the state has been very vocal about housing being this super high priority project, right? And there's been some recent bills that were approved or introduced, both introduced and approved, that incentivize these types of things. And our most recent multifamily project, this 48 unit that I mentioned, we actually contacted some state agencies to try to get some assistance with some of these new programs. And we didn't make much headway. We contacted the Department of Treasury, said, hey, listen, there's new programs out there. We got a developer who really wants to take advantage of it. And they're like, yeah, we really can't help you. We don't know what the rules are. In fact, the gentleman I talked to didn't even know what I was talking about. So this information is out there, and there's a lot of press associated with it, and a lot of drive with it, but are the programs really there? Are they really prepared to help you? That's the biggest challenge that I've found. And then as a small municipality in the state of Michigan, we don't have the staff that is just dedicated to this, the tracking grant dollars and searching for these opportunities that are out there. And some type of really true clearinghouse for these types of things, where you could actually just make a phone call and say, this is what's on the table, here's what's going on, here's the type of property we're dealing with, here's the type of project, what is out there, what really is out there and what can help you, would be immense help.
Okay, all right, well, let's get to Juan. We're back to the original question, okay? So you took the marketplace, and the question presumes that maybe you did something to change this dynamic that's been out, this malaise that's been out in the marketplace, and pushed it in your favor. What did you do to do that?
Without a doubt, in Bridgman, the catalyst was changing the regulatory environment. That was, for us, the dynamic that shifted, that allowed us to attract both of these projects without changing our zoning ordinance. And really, that's the domain we operate in at City Hall, right? That's what we do. That's our specialty. That's our wheelhouse. And in order to create a climate that's welcoming for development, for investment, we had to change our rules. And that's a legislative process. And we educated ourselves, and we created a new planned unit development ordinance, which gave us the flexibility. We allowed the developers to increase density. We even changed our road standards. I can't, for those of you who are not in government, it's extraordinarily rare for a government to modify its road standards. There's a reason why right-of-ways have been 66 feet wide for, decades. Well, we modified that. We lowered the requirement and we allowed our developer to build a narrower public road. And that paved the way, almost quite literally, for this development to occur.
So this isn't just the planner bias, going, I see this through my lens. This is literally like the developers, the development hinged on some of those really critical changes that you all made.
It's safe to say that without the changes that we made to our ordinances, neither of these projects, neither the Harbor Habitat for Humanity project, nor the Bridgman Trail 68-unit project would have occurred. They wouldn't have been possible because, to your point, they wouldn't have been able to pencil out, well, certainly the larger project wouldn't have been able to pencil out because the developer told us that.
And this is not an issue with emergency services and that kind of thing. I mean, that's where my head goes immediately is, okay, so you're compromising the ability of emergency services to access in the way that they would in a road that's, the standard width and all of that. Not an issue.
I'm glad you brought that up because we looked at that carefully. We said, we can't compromise public safety. So the ability for a fire truck to go down a narrower road, well, who's going to review that? Well, the city engineer and the fire chief should have the ability to review that and make sure that that's possible. And we wrote that right into the revised ordinance.
That they would be consulted.
Yeah, it's part of the pathway to approval.
Excellent. Okay, Emily, sorry it took so long
Oh,
to get to you.
that's okay. I'm in no rush. We made a zoning change. So the city of St. Joseph has been really protective about where short-term rentals could be wisely. And so we made a change that allowed short-term rentals in the downtown, in the D district, really just in the commercial area. So we're talking about upstairs apartments above, a restaurant or a retail shop. And without that change, short-term rentals wouldn't be possible. I don't know if we go into it now or with future questions, but there was a lot of back and forth because St. Joe wouldn't be St. Joe if we weren't talking about parking. And so there were a lot of challenges around how many parking spaces will be required, and the DDA was involved, and the Planning Commission, and the City Commission. So there was a lot of back and forth around that as well to figure out what is the right requirement that won't be a barrier to getting short-term rentals in place. And ultimately, there are no parking requirements, which is, I think going to be very helpful in bringing some short-term rentals into the downtown.
Don't feel bad about St. Joe focusing on parking because this, from the planner's perspective, parking is this anchor that pulls down a lot of progressive stuff. And we all need to kind of get over that. I mean, we spent a fair amount of our morning already talking about non-motorized trails and how important they are. Single passenger vehicles are not the thing that should be driving development all over this place. It is not a healthy place for us all to be. We need to get to a better place than that. There, I'm done pontificating about that. All right, so generally we understand how housing works, but I want to make sure that we're level set in the room. A developer sees an opportunity, they work out a proposal, the financing is built, they approach the community for permitting and or zoning discussions. Sometimes zoning issues require requests to the community for zoning approvals or changes, and if successful, permitting proceeds. In the case of your recent success, were there critical inflection points along the journey that may have been unique to your project, right? So you took that sort of general process and there was a moment, and for this particular project, something different happened. and it pushed it to a new place. Can you talk about some of those important inflection points so people know, appointed elected officials are engaged in the process, thinking about how to change it to make it work for particular projects? How did that happen in your cases? Juan, why don't you start?
I have a story. I promise this is the abridged version. I've shared this story a few times over the years.
You might want to crack your water bottle open if it's going to dry you up.
So it's not specific to these two projects, but it speaks to setting the stage for a community to allow itself to change and make those important regulatory changes to create that welcoming environment I was just talking about. Several years ago, there was a home kitty corner from City Hall that burned down. Family of 4 lived in the home. They moved away. They chose not to rebuild this house. So the property sat vacant for a little while. A young fellow in his 20s came into City Hall one day, and he showed me a picture of a fairly contemporary home, something you'd expect to see in Portland, Oregon, more than Bridgman, Michigan. And he said, I want to build this house on that lot across from City Hall. But I looked at your zoning ordinance and it won't let me, because you guys require a minimum of 1,200 square feet for a home, and this house is 850 square feet. And it just so happened that we were in the middle of updating our zoning ordinance. This is in 2017. And we were having meetings with our planning commission on a regular basis, which is what you do. So I said, would you be willing to come to our planning commission meeting and share your story to the planning commission? Bring this picture. I'll give you plenty of airtime and make the case for why we should modify our zoning ordinance. And he did. He brought his dad, because he and his dad were going to build this home. And the planning commission heard him and said, well, why wouldn't we lower the minimum square footage to 800 square feet so this guy can build his house? Isn't that what we want? Well, yeah, you have the power to do it. So they were tripping over themselves to make the recommendation to the city council. And then he went to the city council meeting. How do you think that went? They did the same thing. I think that is how you get things done in front of elected bodies. You empower them and you enlighten them. And it's not bureaucrats like us. I mean, we're part of the process, obviously, but they know what they're going to hear from us, right? We need other folks to come in and help influence their decisions and enlighten them. That's how real change happens, in my opinion.
It also feels like this is a chance to highlight the fact that this is not some wonky, word-based change in a zoning ordinance. These are human beings who come in and say, I would love to do this, but the words aren't letting me do it. Can we? And so humans connecting to humans and going, oh, I get it now. I see a real example of why this is inhibiting something we want.
The story concludes the day, quite literally, the day after the zoning ordinance was adopted by the city council. He was at City Hall with his building permit, and the house that he showed us that day is what's standing there today.
Wow. What a great storyteller he is. Oh, my. Rick, how about it? Great. Give us another really good story.
Well, I don't have one that good, but something along very similar lines is we kept seeing people with ideas, what they wanted to build. And, our old community, all the lots are plotted, they're small, and we have a 1,200 square foot requirement for houses, which is unreasonable in small plotted neighborhoods. And so we were constantly seeing requests for variances. I want to build a 950 square foot house. Well, every house in that block was 950 square feet, so why wouldn't you, right? And parking. Parking is just, it's almost mind-numbing how often that comes up and how much of it there really is if you just look for it. But, and so, there were requests to lower the parking requirements or the number of spaces for a multifamily project, those types of things. So you start seeing this pattern of requests that are coming in, and then you go to your planning commission and say, listen, we got a problem. This just isn't working anymore. And our planning commission was very willing to take that on. And in fact, we expect it to wrap up in the next 30 to 45 days, but they've been in a 2-year process of completely rewriting the zoning ordinance from cover to cover. And really going back and pulling documents from our zoning board of appeals and requests from developers and seeing how those can actually be incorporated into the new zoning ordinance.
Now, not every one of these questions requires each of you to answer it. So, and time, you know, if I get it. But Emily, do you feel like you have a response to the?
I do,
Yeah,
if
well,
you
just
feel like I
remember.
have time.
You know,
So I knew I was getting ahead of myself earlier. I just wanted to talk on short-term rentals a little bit, using your word, about the bureaucratic process. I just, you know, watching it was so fascinating. I made a flow chart this morning. So short-term rentals, the DDA, Downtown Development Authority, thought it was a good idea. And so they, via me, asked the City Commission to consider short-term rentals. And so the City Commission voted and said, yes, that's a great idea. And so they then asked the Planning Commission to consider short-term rentals. And so over the course of many meetings, the Planning Commission considered short-term rentals, and there was input from the public, and the DDA didn't like the direction they were moving, so the DDA wrote a memo to the Planning Commission, and then the Planning Commission considered that, and then the Planning Commission made some changes to what they recommended, and then the Planning Commission brought it to the City Commission, where more comments were given, and the DDA showed up, and there was back and forth, and ultimately, it came down to parking, like I said, and someone in the audience standing up and saying, I really think it's time for us to move on and move past parking. We're going to soon see that this is dated, very similar, John, to what you just said. And you know, whether the City Commission was going to vote the way they did before that or not, I don't know. But ultimately, they passed short-term rentals, and there were no parking requirements. And I say all of that to say that it is such a bureaucratic process. And also, the process worked great. I mean, it's not quick, but it worked great. And all of those points where there were requests written and memos and comments, I mean, those were all pivotal in their own way and really important. And I mean, maybe it's just because I'm kind of a government nerd, but I thought it was fabulous to watch and to see how each of those critical moments impacted this process.
she's a government nerd. Isn't that nice? And Darwin, I can feel your brain moving from here. What's going on?
No,
in your-
just everything that everyone else has said. We had, when I got to New Buffalo, we were having zoning board of appeals meetings almost weekly because the zoning ordinance was very prohibitive in what people wanted to do. So now we're in the, hopefully, fingers crossed, the final stages of making those regulatory changes to accommodate what we need to do in the city. And we're at a 3-year of a complete rewrite of the ordinance to do so. So that is, it takes those kind of inflection points when you look and say, we got to do something, because the zoning board of appeals shouldn't really meet that often. They were meeting more than the city council was meeting. So yeah, we had to do something.
Right.
So we embarked on that change in the zoning, complete rewrite of the zoning ordinance.
Between what developers want to do and others involved in making things happen, and what government has to do, there's friction in the system. Do you have observations beyond what you've already said that your experience has told us these are the points where friction exists, we can make it better, systemically better? What should we do? And if there's a different answer to that question, I think this is a broader, more general kind of a, systemic question. I don't have to go through across each of you, but are there answers to that where the system is, well, let's not say broken, but it doesn't function as well as it could? And certainly in this case, we need fixes now, right? This is a crisis, and we're way behind on fixing it. And we got the government nerd here who says it worked great, but then does the developer who's waiting for the whole process to play out, do they think it's great? So, how do we resolve that friction so that it moves at a rate that everybody's happy with?
We humanize the issue. like in my example with my story. A panel, we created a panel of folks that we invited to address the city council. One of whom was the director of Harbor Habitat for Humanity, Aaron Hudson. The other one was a local fellow who owns all of the apartment complexes in the city of Bridgman. And the other one was the vice president of B&L Information Systems. His input was extraordinarily valuable in persuading the council to make necessary changes to the city's regulatory environment. He told the council, he pleaded, he said, please help us. Our company wants to expand, it wants to grow, it's having a challenge in recruiting people to the community because there's no housing. He said, whatever it takes, please make changes to the regulatory environment to allow this housing to come in. He said the story that sticks with me that I'll share with you very quickly here is they had actually recruited someone to B&L Information Systems from Chicago. The person had basically all but signed on the dotted line. They came to the area, they went around Bridgman, couldn't really find anything to live in. And then they went around Southwest Michigan, they couldn't find anything, so they actually essentially declined to work for the company. They went back to Chicago, strictly because of housing, right? How many times does that repeat itself? And the city council would not have otherwise heard that story had he not been invited to address them. So I think it's incumbent upon us to make those connections and humanize the issue. And then my plea to all of you, those of you in the non-governmental space and the private sector space, is please come to our council meetings and make the pitch. Help us persuade the council why we should change the nuts and bolts of our zoning ordinances. I think that will make a difference in the end. It did for us.
Emily?
I think a key part of it is about listening and pursuing zoning reform, right? I think there are issues that you bang up against over and over. You know, parking is a good example that I'm using for St. Joe. For anyone who spends time in St. Joe, you'll know that we also get a lot of complaints about our sign ordinance. And so when you hear the same thing over and over, and maybe it's gotten in the way of progress, I think part of it is to listen and start to look at reform. There's also best practices out there, right? And so one example I'll give is that we're really interested in accessory dwelling units, not because people have been coming and asking us, but because we know it's a best practice. We know it's a way to have more housing, and so it's a best practice out there that we're interested in pursuing. So I think it's a combination of those two things, but to your very well stated point, just because the system worked doesn't mean the system couldn't be simpler. And there is a lot that you can certainly improve.
We're getting close on time, so shall I keep it rolling here through some other questions? Mr. Prose, how are we doing on time? Okay. I don't want to wear everybody out, but okay, so collaborations. Are you seeing new collaborations evolving that are helping to address the situation, that weren't there before, that are proving effective, so that folks in the audience can think, oh, maybe I can recreate that in some way? Any thoughts on that, Rick?
Yes, we have some new ones, and we have some long-time relationships that are being kind of rekindled, I guess I would say. Our local foundations have been very active with the city of Niles for decades, but they have engaged themselves in this housing component. And then we have a not-for-profit organization called In Focus, which many of you probably know about, that kind of the core of their business is to recruit young graduates and try to convince them that Southwest Michigan, Northern Indiana is a really good place to stay rather than moving on someplace. But we have engaged them along with our local foundations to really look at this housing issues in our communities, both in Niles and Buchanan specifically. And we're beyond new construction of housing, we're looking at trying to increase the quality of housing that's there today. Both of our communities have some pretty aged housing in them. So both those projects are underway right now.
I really like the mention of foundations here. This might be unconventional for people in the room to hear that foundations are really interested in housing, but it's a fact. Lisa, I've heard this, and I'm hearing it statewide, so thanks for mentioning it.
But it's crucial to economic development.
Yeah.
I mean, we have, for a community, not to get way into the weeds about how communities are financed and what have you, but if a community isn't turning over its housing stock or creating new housing stock and new business, we will die on the vine. The funding models in this state will actually make you lose money if you aren't doing these things. We have to grow. We have to create these quality places for people who want to be there.
Okay, lightning round. Any additions to what Rick has said?
We're working on a new development in downtown St. Joseph, which we're really excited about. We're working with MEDC through the RRC, which Rick mentioned, and we've got a great collaboration with Cornerstone that we're really appreciative of.
Cool, yeah, great.
What you said earlier resonated with me as far as individuals being introduced to you that otherwise wouldn't normally be in the space. You know, if it wasn't for a collaborative effort, our developer for Bridgman Trails was introduced to us by Arthur Havlicek at the Regional Chamber. He made the connection, and he otherwise wouldn't have visited Bridgman had that connection not been made.
All right, shout out to Arthur.
Yeah, well, yeah, I have to thank him for that.
And Rob.
Yeah.
What do you say? Anything else, Darwin?
No.
All right. Now, this is what looks like the hook when you're at the SLC, so I get it. There were other really probing questions I was going to ask, but the time won't allow. Yes, Q&A.
Yeah, John, you got really close to the question I was going to ask. You
That
went
was one of the three
you
that I
went
had
right
left.
up to the ledge, and then you didn't go there. But I think it would be helpful, let's put ourselves in the shoes of a private developer. Every community in Michigan wants housing. Every community in Michigan is competing for that developer to come in and risk their sweat and hard-earned money and capital to build in our community. You got, Darwin mentioned macro. Rick mentioned Niles is a good place to do rehab. Juan did a great job talking about regulatory. So did Emily in terms of STRs. So here's the question, and this is going to be uncomfortable for you, okay? We have 152,000 people in this county. We have 39 municipalities, 39. 39 planning commissions, 39 zoning board of appeals. You know where I'm going, right? We've got 39 different systems that a developer would have to navigate. Do we have too many municipalities for 152,000 people? The second part of my question is this, a little bit more political, but really not when you think about it. On our local boards and commissions, we're having a hard time finding people willing to serve. We have municipalities that have a hard time getting a quorum. When I looked at the filings this week, I live in the second largest municipality in Berrien County, Lincoln Township, 16,000 people. We do not have anyone running for township clerk in a clerk-run township. Do we have too much local government in order to do some of the stuff we want to do?
Darwin Watson, give it up.
To your point, if I had a magic wand and could wave it, the thought of thinking, as I said, macroly, and understanding that if you look at 150,000 people roughly, it's really one big city. And if everybody could set aside the I need it to be mine mentality at times, we could get a lot more done. So therefore, it's more of an education and empowerment, I think, and really driving home, if you want this community to grow, you're going to have to sometimes get out your own way and let it be done. Because as the tide rises, every boat gets lifted. And if New Buffalo doesn't have it and Bridgman does have it, send it to Bridgman because the community wins. as far as your second question. That's what I think we're all here for, is to grow the population. And how do we attract them to this area if we don't do the things collectively from a macro level to make that happen?
But the question is a little bit more about those, not just who relocate here, but who are willing to engage in the service of leading.
I'll tell you this from a mentor of mine who said, people will come when they think something is being taken away from them. But just germanely coming to government, it's not sexy, it's not popular, it's hard. And a lot of people don't understand this, so they stay away from it. So you've got to get out and engage and make it sexy and make it popular for everybody so that you can get more engagement.
Wait a minute, government process not sexy? Emily, what is he talking about? All right?
It's ridiculous.
I know, it's absurd. Any other answers to this difficult question? Rick?
Oh, sorry. Alan, there's 1,200 townships in the state of Michigan. There's 500 cities and villages, 1,700 local units of government. There's 2,100. Plus the authorities. Right? You know that number well, right? It's too much government, to answer your question.
Go ahead, Rick. That's probably true. It's probably too much government. Sitting here as a bureaucrat, I don't know exactly how you solve it, and I think it is a very interesting question for some group of folks to look at. Sitting here and what I feel like we can control, I think there is a great opportunity for more sharing, from shared services to best practices. I was just talking to someone recently about, why aren't we all buying paper together, right, to save some money? Why aren't we all buying, you name it? There are shared service possibilities that I think 39 municipalities ought to be looking at, and I think the same can be true for zoning, right? If you figured out something that's helped with development, or we figured out something to improve signage, or whatever it is, why aren't we digging into the weeds to really talk about, hey, we just did this great thing and you ought to look at it too. Solving the question of 39 municipalities is going to be thorny and hard and take a long time, but collaborating, I think, there's so much opportunity there.
Well, I'm not going to weigh in whether or not there should be more or less municipalities, but I just want to share an experience that we've had. So, and in fact, Juan was involved in one I'm going to mention about. We tried a zoning overlay district that would have incorporated the city of Niles in an adjoining township, so that anyone coming in mostly commercial areas would see the exact same zoning requirements. And we spent quite a bit of time on that. And the city of Niles ended up adopting those requirements, and the adjoining municipality chose not to. And then, we have 5 different fire jurisdictions within 10 miles of each other. And so about 6 years ago, I guess it was, we took a strong push to try to consolidate all of those into fire district. And it would have taken several volunteer fire departments and made them all full-time staffed. It should have significantly increased the response time, changed their ISO ratings, lowered insurance costs for everybody in the community, all of those types of things. But everything's just so siloed. You just hit a brick wall. And then the other thing that gets thrown back at me, and again, Niles isn't this, megatropolis by any means, but we're one of those larger communities in that south part of the county. And when we pitch these ideas, it's kind of like, oh, well, Big Brother wants this, or Niles wants to take over all of this stuff. And that really isn't the motivation behind it. The motivation is efficiency and quality of service and quality of life for the people in the community. So if it ever does happen in the future, I don't think it's going to be the city of Niles that's going to have to make that happen. It's going to have to be some of these other communities that realize there's opportunity there.
I can't believe we have room for more. Do we have one more question or something?
Yeah, thanks. I got a quick question, and this is not for Darwin because it's for the other 4 of you. And You too, John, because you mentioned it. And, you know, you have to excuse my archaic thinking here, and I know we live in a world where a vision of single-family or single person-driven cars is going to be a thing of the past, but that's not the reality. And my comment would be, you know, I have a town with 2,505 individual residential parcels, and per zoning ordinance, each have a parking requirement of 2, which gives me parking for about 5,000 cars. And then I have another 400 maybe local spaces for public parking. But on any given day in the summer of New Buffalo, we have over 10,000 cars in town. So where are those other 5,000 cars parking? I will leave that to your imagination. So the question is, when you guys dismiss parking in the development of new housing, you know, enlighten me to where you're going with that. Is that just my thinking because I live in a town with this massive problem, or do you have other solutions that I am unaware?
So this is for all of us, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. I have an answer.
Well, I can take a shot at it if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
And this is just specific to my community, okay? We have a number of municipal-owned parking lots in our commercial districts that are significantly underutilized. And the conversation that often occurs is, well, it's just too far. You know, if I park in that parking lot, it's too far to walk to that business in downtown or what have you. So we created this map that put a dot in the middle of our adjoining neighbor's Walmart, and then halfway out into the parking lot in the Walmart. And all of our municipal parking lots are closer to these individual stores in the downtown than the individual that goes and parks in the middle of Walmart parking lot and then walks in the middle of the Walmart store. So it's perception, you know, I feel like our community has become so accustomed that I should be able to park directly in front of something, which just isn't reality. I mean, I assume we've all visited downtown Chicago. I mean, you don't park in front of the store. You park in a parking garage someplace and you walk. So I think it's an education component. I can see where you could have a massive parking issue, but when you really take a look in our community at the amount of municipal offered parking, the amount of parking that's already there by privately owned individuals, commercial, and all the on-street parking we have, and it's all free. We have parking coming out of our ears.
I would argue that the question, though it is a good one, is disingenuous, because we're talking about housing relative to parking for that housing. You're talking about parking that is about people coming from out of town, there for the day. Those two issues are separate parking issues. One can be solved in one way, another one can be solved in a different way. So I'm not discounting the need for parking. I'm saying that the different needs are not all the same. I think we're done.
Please give a hand to our panelists. Thank you all very much. 5-minute break, lots of coffee and rolls and sweet things and so forth. Join us in 5 minutes. We'll start right on time. Thank you.